Welcome to The Explainer. So, today we're going to dive into the world of beauty and cosmetology. But we're not talking about the latest styles. We're actually investigating a system that, according to a brand new report from the New American Business Association, might be trapping entrepreneurs before they can even get their start.
All right, so let's jump right in, because really, this whole thing boils down to one pretty shocking fact. Okay, so get this. To become a licensed cosmetologist in some states, you could need up to 2,100 hours of training. Now compare that to becoming an EMT, someone who's trained for actual life or death emergencies, which can take as little as 33 hours. I mean, think about that for a second. In some cases, that's over 40 times more training to learn how to style hair than it does to literally save a life. It's just wild.
And just so you can wrap your head around that number, 2,100 hours? That's basically like working a full-time job for a year to a year and a half, nonstop. It's a massive commitment of your time and your money, often costing tens of thousands of dollars just in tuition.
So this brings us to the big question, right? The one that's going to drive this whole explainer. If all these hours aren't really about keeping people safe, then what's the real story here? What's really going on? Well, to find that answer, you gotta follow the rules. And that leads us straight to the state cosmetology boards. And what we find there? It's the classic case of the fox guarding the henhouse.
You see, the whole problem really boils down to this idea called regulatory capture. And what that means is, basically, the industry that's supposed to be regulated is the one making the rules for itself. And that, right there, creates a massive built-in conflict of interest.
And look, this slide just shows it perfectly. Take a state like Missouri, and this is pretty typical, by the way. A huge chunk of the board, we're talking the vast majority, is made up of people who own the schools and the salons. These are the folks who have a direct financial reason to make it harder for new competition to enter the market. They benefit from all those long training hours and high barriers to entry.
And hey, don't just take my word for it. Back in 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court actually weighed in on this, saying that these kinds of boards can act like, and I'm quoting here, legalized cartels. So the key takeaway here is this isn't some bug in the system, it's a feature.
Okay, so if the goal isn't safety, what's the motive? Well, as the report argues, it's pretty simple. It all comes down to money.
So when you actually break down what's being taught in all those thousands of hours, researchers found that only about a quarter of it is actually for health and safety. The rest of the time is filled with, well, other things, which really makes you wonder, what exactly are students paying for?
And this, right here, this is kind of the smoking gun. Get this. More than 95% of beauty schools design their programs to last for the exact minimum number of hours the state requires. I mean, if all those extra hours were really about better education, you'd see schools competing, offering different length programs, right? But no, this suggests it's all about one thing: maxing out the tuition money they're legally allowed to charge. And it gets even better, for the schools anyway. You know how students work in the school salon? They're providing services to paying customers, but the students, they don't get paid. In fact, they are paying tuition for the privilege of working. It's basically a massive system of unpaid labor that brings in over $200 million a year for these schools.
So, this isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. This system has real victims. It crushes the dreams of people who want to start their own business. And the NABA report points out that this hits immigrant and minority communities the hardest, the very people who often see this industry as a real path to opportunity.
I mean, just look at this case from Iowa, La James International College. This timeline shows a pattern stretching over a decade. First, they sue to block a cheaper community college from competing. Then they get fined by the state for treating students like free labor. Then they're sued again and again. It's just one thing after another.
And if you thought that was bad, check out the Maranello Schools of Beauty. The fraud here was so massive across 56 different campuses that the federal government literally had to forgive the student loans for 28,000 people. 28,000. That's just a mind-boggling number.
So what were they doing? I mean, it was a whole shebang. They were accused of faking high school diplomas just to get students in the door. They were helping people who didn't qualify get federal loans. And then they were barely teaching them anything. It was all just a scheme to collect that federal aid money, built on taxpayer dollars and student debt. Okay, so it sounds pretty bleak, right? But here's the good news. The story doesn't end there. People are starting to wake up to this.
And they're fighting back. And we're finally starting to see some cracks appear in this whole system. And we're seeing some real wins. You've got states like Utah and Pennsylvania saying, you know what? You don't need a license for something simple like hair braiding or a blow dry. That's a huge deal for small entrepreneurs. And then you have big states like California and Virginia slashing those crazy hour requirements way down. That's real progress.
And the pushback isn't just from lawmakers. It's coming from inside the industry. Down in Louisiana, you have a group of practitioners, many of them from the Vietnamese American community, who are actually suing their own state board. They're basically calling them out, saying the board is more interested in making money from fines than in actually protecting anyone.
So, okay, where do we go from here? How do we actually fix this mess? Well, the good news is the NABA report lays out a really clear game plan. It's basically a 4-part strategy. Step 1, we have to get the word out. Share the stories of the people who've been hurt by this. Step 2, push for common sense deregulation. Get rid of the unnecessary rules. Step 3, go after the boards themselves. Challenge how they're set up legally and politically. And step 4, support the good guys, the community colleges and apprenticeship programs that offer an affordable, honest path.
Look, at the end of the day, the takeaway is pretty simple. Nobody's saying we should get rid of all regulations. We need rules that keep people safe. But what we don't need are these artificial barriers that are just there to protect the insiders. We need to tear those down to unlock real opportunity, especially for the entrepreneurs in immigrant and minority communities who see this industry as their shot.
So it all leaves us with this one big question to think about, right? When does a regulation stop being about protecting you and me, the public, and start being about protecting a cartel? That's the line we have to figure out. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.